Welcome to Create Your Vibrant Life podcast, episode number 19. Today is a super special episode because we have our first guest. I'm very picky about who I invite into the podcast because I want this experience to be amazing for you all. But I really wanted you to experience this amazing person. But before I do that, I'm going to give you a little teaser of who this person might be. So I'm going to share the quote by JP Morgan. The JP Morgan quote says, "Millionaires don't need astrologers, billionaires do." And you know how those Apple clearly podcast is on my head. Apple product launches are very randomly timed. Those dates are chosen by astrologers. Mansa Musa of Mali is the richest human being in the history of the planet, and he has a personal net worth of 400 billion. And guess what he used? Astrologers. Yes, astrologers. Astrology has been around for many billions. I mean, not billions. Clearly, billions is also on my mind. Please bear with me, guys. Astrology it's an ancient science, ancient wisdom. And by now, you might be guessing who the guest is. Yes, it's an astrologer. His name is Armand Diaz. And I'm going to introduce him to you guys in a second. Oh my goodness, I can't speak today. What's going on with me? Anyways, but before I do that, the reason I invited him to be a guest is because astrology is not new to me. I grew up with astrology. I'm Indian by now. You must have guessed that too. So I'm Indian. I grew up with astrology. It was just part of how we, the moment a baby is born, their astrological chart is created based on their time of birth and place of birth and all that. And it's usually based out of Vedic astrology. Armand practices Western astrology, so it's slightly different. But it's based on the same premises. So it's not new to me, but I know nothing about astrology other than, hey, there's a Mercury retrograde happening or some kind of retrograde is happening. Oh my God, like I feel it in my body often when there's something happening in the planet because I'm intuitive, as might some of you as well listening to this podcast. But most of all, what happens is that because I just feel I don't exactly know what's happening on the planetary front, but I know something is happening. And I have consulted with astrologers over the course of my career, over the course of my life, off and on. It's not something that I subscribe to all the time, but it's always intrigued me. Metaphysics has always intrigued me. And there's a lot of wisdom in consulting with astrology. So here's a myth buster for any of you listening. Astrology is not a prediction of the future. It's not. Absolutely not. We all have free will. We co-create our lives. We have the ability to shift and make things happen no matter what your darn astrology chart tells you. Okay. So don't let that fool you. It's more about seeing how can I work with my makeup? Astrology, basically your specific astrology chart, which is called the natal chart, basically tells you what is possible for you, what should you be looking for, what can serve you, what might not serve you. So when you can see that, right, and then you can work, say you want to do a big business venture, you can find the timing that might work best for you based on your specific astrological chart. So I'm going to invite you to listen with an open mind, an open heart, and just let this information come to you. Now, I did this recording back in May, and there's a reason I couldn't upload it until now, but just to stay open. So some of the context of which he's giving you might be a little, obviously this is July, so there's a little time gap. But whatever he says, see if you can apply it to your own life. And it's very, very valuable when you can start to see it from a 30-foot viewpoint. It's really interesting. I had a great time talking to him, and I know that you will as well. If you just stay with an open mind and open heart, you'll receive a lot of amazing information from this session. So, as always, I'm so grateful for you, listener. And now, without any delay, let me introduce you to Armand Diaz. our first guest and our guest astrologer for this week. Welcome to the Create Your Vibrant Life podcast. If you are the type of person who's a visionary, who wants more from life, who has high dreams and aspirations, wants to evolve spiritually and impact the world, and in the meantime, have time and energy to do the things that are important to you, then whatever you do, tune into this podcast every week. I'm your host, Padma Ali. I help stressed out overachievers find clarity and awaken to their highest potential using my unique NEW, New You Blueprint. I combine neuropsychology, energy healing, and wisdom to create long-lasting changes, and that's what I bring to you in this podcast. I've had a successful career in the field of psychology for over 20 plus years, along with extensive training and experience in ancient healing practices, which I now bring to my coaching work with my clients. And that's what inspired me to do this podcast, to bring this knowledge and wisdom to the world. So I'm incredibly grateful for you to be a part of this journey with me, and I'm so excited to serve you. So welcome. Welcome to Create Your Vibrant Life podcast. And today we have an amazing guest. His name is Armand. And Armand is a consulting astrologer. And he's the president of NCGR, which he will tell us what it is, because I don't really know what that is. And he's written a lot of books. But most importantly, like, I was introduced to Armand sometime last year, and I was just blown away. I had a couple of sessions with him, and I really was struck by how accurate he was with all my chart and all the information that he was giving me. So I really wanted him to be a guest in our podcast so our listeners can benefit from having this amazing information about what's happening in current times and plus more. So stay tuned, because we're going to have some really exciting stuff for you guys. So welcome, Armand.
Thank you so much, Padma.
I didn't even say your last name correctly. So can you just do a formal introduction for us?
Well, it's not that formal, but my name is Armand Diaz, and you can check me out at armanddiaz.com.
Perfect.
And that's as formal as I need to be about things.
ArmandDiaz.com is good. And in the end, we'll have show notes, so in the show notes, you'll see all the information of where you can find Armand, because after this, you're going to be running to him for an appointment. I can guarantee you that.
So you were mentioning about NCGR, which it's one of the world's oldest and largest astrology organizations, and but its name is, we like to go by the acronym NCGR because it's actually an acronym, but we have to go by the initials because it is the National Council for Geocosmic Research, which is a bad name. And we all recognize it's a bad name, but we kind of keep it for sentimental reasons. We incorporated in 1970. I wasn't there, mind you. I was 11, but they incorporated it in 1971 in Massachusetts, where astrology was illegal. And so they could not incorporate as the National Council for Astrological Research. So they called it Geocosmic Research. And
oh my goodness.
So that was the inauspicious beginnings to the organization. But NCGR is a great organization if you want to learn about astrology, if you're interested, if you want to see what's going on. We have conferences, we have publications. It's great stuff.
And I love that astrology is now more mainstream, and most people listening to my podcast probably are familiar with astrology. But just for the heck of it, maybe you can give us like this broad overview of what astrology is and how we can connect it to what's happening in today's crazy COVID, whatever stuff happening.
Well, yeah, it's much easier to talk about astrology in specifics than it is to talk about it in general. It is, It is based on a correlation between what happens in the heavens and what happens down here. And why there should be such a correlation is, of course, a long and complex philosophical argument. But you could just see if it works and start from there. I mean, it's hard to explain. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that our consciousness and the physical world are really sort of the inside and the outside of the same thing. Rather than, we sort of have the idea that we are inside of ourselves, in our brain or in our body or something like that, and the cosmos is out there, and there's we interact with it, but really we are it, and
That's
it
so
is
beautiful.
us. Yeah, we are it. We are the cosmos, and the cosmos is us.
That's just brilliant. I love that definition of astrology. Is just we are the same. It's just manifesting differently.
It's the inside and it's the outside, and there's we have little nodes of consciousness, right? I'm a node of consciousness. You are. Everyone listening is, and so there's this web of consciousness that's all very well connected. We've really demonstrated already that there are all kinds of connections between people and animals, among groups of people, where like the consciousness just moves as its own thing. And so, with astrology, we're just sort of looking at a specific lens of that. We're just looking through one particular frame to see how things are going. It's not like the planet Saturn really influences us. I mean, we talk about it as though it does, but there is that influence. That is, we have projected onto Saturn, and Saturn has projected back to us a certain kind of energy, and that just resonates with us. And it's a creative process. As I said, it's a big discussion.
So is Saturn playing a role in whatever is happening right now? Like, I am so lame. I'm such a layman when it comes to all these terms. I love astrology, but I know nothing about it.
Everybody says that. Everybody says that they know nothing about astrology. My favorite one is, I've been studying it for years, but I don't know anything. It's like, really, though, I mean, I think that is just something that we all kind of feel about anything. Any field is so huge and has so many things that you tend to think, wow, I don't have any knowledge about it compared to what I could know. But what you could know is infinite. So, yes, by comparison to that, you don't know much.
That's
but
so true.
You probably know enough. But yes, Saturn, few astrologers predicted this pandemic directly.
Oh, wow.
I have to say my colleague, Christine Skinner, who's on the board of NCGR, she said there was a pretty good likelihood of it. And in the Mountain Astrologer magazine, Leah Whitehorse said that with Saturn going into the air sign of Aquarius, we might have to deal with airborne illnesses. I don't think anybody predicted things were going to happen this fast. I have to say, too, all astrologers who look at world event types of things, we all saw that 2020 was going to be a tremendous year of change, and that there were going to be all kinds of crises of one kind or another. I think that I don't know a single financial astrologer who did not predict that there was going to be a huge market drop early in 2020. Mm-hmm. So we got that stuff right. And I think astrologers really understood what the consequences of this were going to be in terms of social and political issues and so on. I think we got that part down right. I don't think anybody saw that a virus was going to come like out of nowhere and in the course of a couple of months completely disrupt, global civilization, though. Well, to answer your question, yes, Saturn's move into the sign of Aquarius in March was largely considered to be a real flashpoint for something like this happening. The virus, actually, there are other planets and celestial bodies that got into Aquarius ahead of time when the virus really started to make its mark and became a news story, and that was Ceres and Mars. Earth Mother Ceres got into Aquarius, and Mars, the warrior, and also associated with infections, got into Aquarius around the time that the virus started to really kick off.
So this is so fascinating to me. I'm really curious because my husband is not at all. He's like, if I love astrology, he's like, whatever. And a lot of people are like that because they think that how can my chart tell me everything about me, right? Like how can it predict the future? And I try to explain like that's not how it is. We still have willpower. We still have our own individual power. So I'm really curious, like how does your individual chart play up against these global things happening, these global planetary movements?
Well, here's something for you. You, by all means, have your own personal chart. And we're looking at something like a pandemic. Okay, well, what is the relationship between my individual birth chart and the pandemic? That may or may not be something that we see of great interest. However, you also have the chart of the place that you're living in, right? There is, let's say, for example, there's a chart for New York City.
Ah.
There's a chart for New York State, and there's a chart for the United States. And if you're living in New York City, all of those charts also have an effect. And in a sense, again, we tend to think of ourselves as in here, someplace in our body, as what Alan Watts called the skin encapsulated ego. We tend to think that we're in here, and then we happen to we walk around out there. But in truth, the connection is, that's the environment that you're in. You're like a fish in the fish tank, what happens to the fish tank, it happens to you. And so some of this stuff we get swept up in because of where we're living, because of what's happening. For example, the chart of the United States right now is under tremendous stress. And so it's not surprising that we're seeing it's not surprising that we're seeing the pandemic so prevalent as an issue in the United States. But we would expect that the consequences of it, again, socially, politically, that type of thing, would be great. And sometimes, at the end of the day, the truth of the matter is that your own chart may not show anything that is all that directly related to what's happening, but those other charts do show it.
Wow, I'm so intrigued by all this. Is there anything else you want to add about that, or can I ask you I was like waiting to ask you this question.
Well, ask me the question you've been waiting for. Heaven forfend we get to the end and there's no mention of it.
Oh, so my question, you had mentioned about how astrological timing can influence the process of manifestation. And I was like, whoa, how is that? How do you do that? Or how does that influence manifestation?
Well, one of the things with astrology that we get really, really right is timing. There are a lot of possibilities. There's only a limited set of astrological symbols. There's only so many planets. Well, there are a lot of asteroids, but there's only so many planets. There's only so many signs and houses of the horoscope. We have a limited set. It's like a box of Legos or something like that, or Tinker Toys. There's only so many options there. And what is important is the way that they combine. Right. So when it comes to meaning, let's say if I looked at your chart and said, well, what can I learn about your career path from your chart? I can come up with a range of possibilities. They may seem to be very, very different, but they all may hang on a particular theme. Somebody that has Cancer on the midheaven, the sign of Cancer on the midheaven, might be a great cook, or might, run a nursery school, or have or might be a counselor. There's a nurturing kind of thing going through the area of career, but it's not necessarily any one specific thing. So we give a range when it comes to things like that. But when we talk about timing, we're really we can be much more precise about how things are going to unfold. So, when you've got your dream, you've got the thing that you want to manifest, whether it's a career thing, it's a relationship thing, and so on, that it really is in your heart and it is what you want is the most important factor. But gosh, it
Mm-hmm.
would be great to sort of catch a wave while you're doing this thing, you know.
Right.
Uh, and so the astrological factors and the waves in astrology are everything from little ripples of what's happening today to larger waves that are what's going on for you this year, and some tsunamis that are what's going on over the course of sometimes 4 or 5 years. What astrology can really help do is to say, okay, this is what you're doing, this is what you want to manifest. Now let's get it on the ground at a time when it's going to work. When you're going to get the most activity, when you're going to get the most energy, well, essentially when the universe is at your back, when it's pushing you in
Uh-huh.
the direction you want to go. My analogy is if you want to have a picnic at the beach, you can have a picnic at the beach any day you want. You can go out there on a snowy February day and have a picnic at the beach. It's not going to be it's not going to be a typical picnic at the beach, but you could do it. But maybe if you want a typical picnic at the beach, maybe we should look for like June or July or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And so the astrological cycles, the astrological energies as they work, help you to pick a good time to launch something, to get something underway, to so that you have things working for you rather than against you.
That makes so much sense. And I think what really stood out to me when with our session was I'm totally paraphrasing, but you were like, okay, you still need to take actions. It's not like, okay, this is so good for your chart has all these things good going on for you, but you still have to take those actions in order for that to come towards you.
Yeah, well, that is one of the things that it's one of the things that manifestors and not just astrologers. Well, I think astrologers may be a little better at this than some other folks on average, but it's still a sticking point for me with a lot of folks when it comes to manifesting things and making things happen. By all means, set your intention. By all means, have good aspects in the astrological chart. But for Pete's sake, go do something. The cosmos responds to action far more than we realize. When we speak to the cosmos, when we speak to spirit, however you want to put it, I know that we're coming from like an internal heart space, and that's so important. It's our mind, it's our spirit, and so there, in a sense, it's the highest level stuff. It's the stuff that's way up there. But there's something about manifestation, and when we're speaking to that whether we talk about it as the unconscious or the cosmos or all of the above, it's rather concrete. It's
Yes.
rather concrete. It really wants to know that it's not just an intention. New moons are always a time for setting intentions. It's a good time to set your intentions, and light your candles, say your prayers, make your vision board, all of that stuff. By all means, do it. I do it. And then I tell people, but a little while after the new moon, make some little tiny concrete step. Within about 24 hours of the actual new moon, if you want a new job, if all you do is just go online and spend a half hour looking, you don't have to do anything else. And then sometime around the first quarter moon, sometime in that week or so after the new moon, well, that's a good time to actually send your resumes out and maybe schedule some interviews and so, if you want a new job, you can't just, once in a while it happens that you set your intentions and the phone rings and somebody's got, your dream job on the other end of it. That does in fact happen sometimes, but it helps to do something. If you, I don't advise people to play the lottery, but if you want to win the lottery, go buy a ticket. It's the right step. The cosmos responds to action. So I think that's important. And timing those actions, I mean, in a sense, we time them to the new moon and the moon phases, the sign that the moon is in and stuff like that. But there's other things that have to be considered, larger cycles that we have, like that are going on in our personal charts and so on. Really, really very, very helpful for getting stuff done.
Yeah, so that makes so much sense. It's almost like, when you know with your own particular chart what timings are good for you, it's like getting in the car and going to your destination without traffic.
Yes.
That much faster because you're taking the action, but the roads are clear for you because it's the right time. That's why sometimes you take so much action and nothing happens. It's like walking through sludge no matter what you do. It's probably because the timing is not right.
Indeed. Well, and sometimes we have to be aware of where we're going with things and what the energies are in their specific flavors. So, for example, if you happen to get a good aspect from, let's say, the planet Saturn, indeed, you could probably, it'll be like driving without traffic, not very fast, but you'll be driving without traffic. And that's a big help. But sometimes, a good aspect from Saturn only comes up maybe every 3 to 5 years or something like that. You sort of don't want to wait for that. So, you have to be aware that maybe Uranus is pushing you to act quickly or something like that. And Saturn is actually putting a little bit of a block to you. And so, okay, listen, you're going to get in your car and you're going to drive to your destination, and it's the right thing to do. But yeah, you're going to have to overcome some resistance. There are going to be some blocks. You're going to have to prove that this is something that you want and something that you can do. So it's very helpful to be aware of that too. That okay, this isn't going to be that easy to do, but it still could be successful if you're willing to do it.
Yeah, and that was so helpful for me when you and I talked, and you had mentioned when seeing my chart that I forget which planet makes me do this, but there's a tendency to worry about money, even if money is not an issue, and it's never been an issue. But it's like something in me that constantly goes back to that for no reason, and it's because of. And when you named it, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense, because my logical brain could not understand why I would stay focused on this one aspect. When nothing on the outside there was no reason to be thinking or worrying about money, but it never made sense. And when you said that, I was like, oh, that's what's happening.
Sure. And some of this stuff actually is generational. If you remember, there was the generation that was born at Pluto in the sign of Cancer, and they were born between like 1914 and around 1939. And so they may be some of the parents and grandparents of people listening, and there may be some people in that group listening now. And that was a group that Pluto had a lot to do with transformation, and Cancer is, security, home, food, and all. And, and they lived through, essentially 2 world wars and the Great Depression, and that was all very Pluto and Cancer stuff. And years later, in 1985, and the person is, they're multimillionaire, living on a big estate and stuff like that, and they're saving the empty mustard jars because they may come in handy someday, and that some of that sort of stuff is generational. Some of that is stuff that, it's not even personal to us. I mean, the personal stuff tends to be the most problematic in a way, or the most advantageous. But some of that stuff is even just generational.
Yeah. Oh, that makes so much sense too. I'm curious, like, how did you get into astrology?
Well, I was always interested in it. I had a globe when I was a little kid that had the astrological symbols on the base of it, the signs.
Oh my God.
And I was just always kind of fascinated of why there would be these different things. And I was always interested in it. And I've always been drawn to divination and various ways of getting information through non-ordinary means and things like that. But I actually got into astrology in 1996, 97, when I started having a series of dreams about astrology. I needed to understand what the dreams were all about, and they were about learning astrology. It turns out. Oh, also, too, I have to say, in much earlier in the 1980s, I had tried to draw up a chart by hand. I'd gotten a book about how to do it, and it was too hard. I can do it now. I've actually taught people to do it now. I can do it now, but I'm really happy to have the computer there, and I just press a couple of buttons, and everything I need is right there.
Wow. But you are brilliant. I've talked to many astrologers in the past, and you really are
Oh,
one
thank
of
you.
the rare kind that resonated for me.
Well, thank you so much. I love astrology, and I think it's very helpful. And that is always that when I begin every single consultation, I'm always thinking, let me give this person what they need. It's always, I know that there's value there for everybody, and I just, it's sorting it out. And that's really where I place the emphasis. And I think, it's easy to get lost in astrology. It's easy to get, you see connections between all of these symbols that are lighting up. It's like, and sometimes when you're talking to a client, it can be a little bit like you're trying to describe what's happening on a pinball machine. And it's really
Yeah.
exciting for you, but they, as as I said before, sometimes you just want to know what time it is. You don't want to know how a watch works.
Yeah. Yeah. But you did with me, because I know nothing about astrology, you still were able to really succinctly tell me exactly what was going on and how it pertained to my specific questions. And that was so, so helpful.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad.
So I have two more questions for you. One is about this Mercury retrograde. It's gotten such a bad rap recently. Like, everybody's talking about Mercury retrograde, and I'm like, you can't blame everything on a planet for whatever wrong is happening in your life. Is there anything you want to share about that?
Okay, well, yeah. Mercury retrograde. Well, first of all, Mercury retrograde does refer to things that are ruled by Mercury, things like communication, technology, transportation, commerce, things like that. Those things are affected by Mercury retrograde. If you're going to start building a house, for example, and Mercury's retrograde, well, house building is not a mercurial thing, so it's no problem. If you're you want to go on a date and you're having what's a relationship matter, Mercury retrograde for the vast majority of people would not be relevant. So it only refers to things that are mercurial. In terms of the way its effect on things, it would not be such a problem if we were not such a mercurial society. We're all about our cars. We're all about being on the computer and sending messages and texting back and forth all the time. We buy a lot of stuff. So we really wind up getting the brunt of it because we are so tuned into mercurial things right now. It does not usually stop things from going through. It just creates headaches. Can I tell a couple of quick stories?
Of course.
These are Mercury retrograde stories that are relevant to myself, but I think that they're good stories. I bought a car with Mercury retrograde. I had to buy a car with Mercury retrograde, and and it was fine. I love the car, no problems with it. Everything was great. But a week after I bought it, I found I was looking at the door and I realized that I had bought from the previous model year. I thought I was buying a 2010 and it was a 2009. It was a little minor thing and stuff like that, but no wonder I got a price that I liked and all of that on it. It wasn't the car that I thought I was buying. I've had a number of other different things. Banks. I went to when my mother passed away. She had. I was the second name on the account, and it should have been a simple thing for me to just take over the account. But it turns out that they had listed me as her nephew rather than her son. and I spent 8 months on this. I spent 8 months trying to get that cleared up. I lived on 201st Street in Bayside, New York, and on the last day of Mercury retrograde, I received and my mail service was terrible, so I often received letters from other places. That has nothing to do with Mercury retrograde. My house number was 3327. I received a letter for 3301 201st Street. Now here's the thing, right? So it was the wrong address. The letter had been mailed on the first day of Mercury retrograde, 21 days earlier. It
Wow.
arrived at my house on the last day of Mercury retrograde. It was the wrong house, but this is the thing. The letter was mailed to and from Topeka, Kansas. It was not supposed to land in New York at all. It should have just gone from one address in Topeka to another, and it landed at my house in Bayside. That is a Mercury retrograde story. There's always traffic on the Belt Parkway in Brooklyn, but with Mercury retrograde, the drawbridge got stuck in the up position. Luggage gets lost all the time, but with Mercury retrograde, JetBlue had an incident where their system completely broke down, and in Kennedy Airport, in the middle of the terminal, they just made a big pyramid of luggage and said, "Try your best to find it." That's it. So you get some really extraordinary stories as well as general headaches. So it's not such a bad thing. It's not a good time to buy a new book, go back and reread something. It's not a great time to sign contracts unless you think you might want to make a change at some point in the future. But the things that you do with Mercury retrograde, you expect some headaches. You expect things to go a little bit wrong. Now, you know what we have coming up this month from May 13th to June 26th? Venus is retrograde.
Ooh, what does that mean?
See, Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year for 3 weeks, but Venus goes retrograde about every 20 months for 40 days. Venus rules values, and also it rules relationships and things like that. So when Venus goes retrograde, it's not a good time to have things appraised. It's not a good time to, it's not a good time to buy artwork or actually any luxury items or things like that. In fact, the 40 days of Venus retrograde correlates quite a bit with, like, let's say, the 40 days of Lent, the 40 days of, the 40 years of Jews in the desert type of thing. There's a lot of 40 days things that tend to represent periods where folks are not supposed to be having a great time of it.
Yeah.
And that's what Venus retrograde is. It's a pretty poor time to start a relationship. It's usually a little bit of a difficult thing. Ironically, when a planet's retrograde, we often want to do the thing that
so
is indicated by the
fascinating.
planet. So you really want to buy a car when Mercury's retrograde. You really want a new computer when Mercury's retrograde. And you very frequently really want a relationship when Venus is retrograde. One of the things about Venus retrograde is that you might have to go back and work on old relationships, and for that reason, it's often pointed out that old lovers come back.
Ooh.
Yeah, usually to demonstrate why they are old lovers. Usually, it's to get closure on that. But yeah, like the energy for a relationship tends to be a little bit lacking during that period of time. It is a little bit more of an inward period where we don't, this year, with the COVID, I think we're all the whole year is really just a retrograde in a sense.
That's so true. So
but-
does it mean that people are going to have more relationship issues surface up during this time that you can?
Yeah, usually unfinished business, things that have not been finished from the past often come back, and you have a little issue again with that.
Nice.
So, it's something to be kind of aware of in this, late spring, earliest summer period. That there is this tendency right now towards relationship stuff being a little bit slow moving. And as I said, we often feel an energy towards it, but it's just not a great time. A great Venus retrograde story was the couple that met, decided they were madly in love, moved in together, and broke up all within the space of the 40 days of a Venus retrograde. They were taking it a little too literally, but
Yeah. Yeah, wow, this is so fascinating. Like, I can talk to you for hours on these topics. Is there anything else you want to add? And then I do want to spend a little bit of time asking you what happens in a session when someone comes to see you, because just to kind of demystify this whole process.
Yeah, well, as you know, I'm pretty conversational. I usually, having looked at the chart, there's usually a few things that'll stand out for me. I'm usually aware of the area of life that has the concern, like that sort of shows up. So
Just by
whether
seeing the chart, you can see that.
yeah, I look at things like the chart of the meeting, the actual time that we schedule for the consultation, and I look at the transits, the things that are happening, because your chart is always the same. And then it's sort of like a game board, and the planets keep moving around it, and they land on different spots and sort of create hot spots. So I usually have an idea of what's going on, and I usually, although I used to say that I shouldn't do this, but I've just accepted that I'm gonna. I usually start with like, okay, these are some of the things that I'm seeing, and in a very general way, this is an outline. You might be thinking about changing careers. You might, this I see some relationship stresses, and the planets and their own particular flavors tell me a little bit about how this is likely to feel, what's playing out. And then most of the time, then after I give a little spiel there with things, usually most of it is a discussion and a kind of working together to come to an understanding about things. Like once I've sort of laid out where things are, then my clients will just say, "Well, yeah, I am thinking about changing jobs, but I really got to know about this also." And so look and see what's going on to answer specific questions about things. And then it's a little bit of a kind of, well, where are you with things? I want to hear what's going on with the person. The more information they give me, the more I can sort of fill in and come up with possibilities. I like to think that, you come away with an action plan. You sort of know something that you can do that,
Right.
or at least what decision you have to make.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So I mean, it can go from a very broad stroke kind of thing to, I mean, by the end of the session, we might be saying, okay, well, a good day to send out that interview request would be next Wednesday. But we might start with, how do you feel about your current job? So there's it's a sort of funneling down from the larger stuff to the specific stuff. So some clients just want, usually not the first time out, but sometimes they just want specific information, like, I'm going to launch this particular project. Can you help me find a good day in the next couple of months? But usually we start with a broader base with things.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And where can people find you, Armand?
ArmandDiaz.com.
That's it. You're not on social media, nothing.
Actually, I was very much on social media, and I was, you better find me through my website now. And partially as a result of the COVID and partially other things, I'm much less on social media now.
You are very wise, I have to say.
There's just so much chatter out there, including mine, including my chatter. It's like,
Yeah.
I felt that I sort of had, like, there was just too much going on. It was this whole big swirl of stuff.
Yeah, so ArmandDiaz.com. I will also put them in the show notes for sure.
Thank you.
And is there anything else you want to share with our listeners?
I can't think of anything right now. I mean, I would go on and on, but that's not anybody's advantage.
Well, I would recommend having a session with you. I think it was so helpful. Very, very helpful.
You so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Armand.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this podcast. Make sure to tag me on Instagram at Padma Ali to share your takeaways from this episode. And lastly, share with your friends and family so they can also benefit from listening to this podcast. For more tips, go on to our website, padmaali.com, and connect with me at the next episode. Take care. Bye.